What's up, SCS Nation, and welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in all of true crime. And today is no exception. The prime suspect in the 2005 disappearance of the late American teen Natalee Holloway is expected to be extradited to the U.S. as soon as Tuesday, although plans may have changed, and we'll tell you why. To face an extortion, to face extortion and fraud charges. That, according to officials in Peru, where Joran Sloot has been serving time for the murder of a Peruvian woman. As I just mentioned, he was convicted of that 2012 homicide of Stephany Flores in his Lima hotel room and sentenced to 28 years in prison. Natalee Holloway, sadly, was officially declared dead in January of 2012. She went missing in 2005. Best guest here today. She's back. Sheryl McCollum, by popular demand. She's an Emmy Award winning CSI investigator from CBS 46's CSI Atlanta. She's the director of the Cold Case Investigative Research Institute, a writer for CrimeOnLine, forensic and crime scene expert for Crime Stories with Nancy Grace, and an actual crime scene investigator for the Metro Atlanta Police. She holds a master's degree in criminal justice with an emphasis on policing and is the co-author of the textbook Cold Case: Pathways to Justice. John Delatorre, Dr. Delatorre, is back, and you guys know him. He is a licensed psychologist practicing out of San Antonio, Texas. He's also licensed in Arizona and New York State, and is a psychological analyst for TV news and court shows. He's also a certified clinical traumatologist. And last but not least, we've got Randy Zellen coming back for a second time. We didn't scare him away with Con the first time. He's a New York City-based former prosecutor turned criminal defense attorney with more than 30 years experience. He's tried cases against both the DOJ and the SEC. He's also an adjunct professor at Cornell Law, and he's appeared on every single television show imaginable, from Fox News to Fox Business to CNN to Headline News to Bloomberg to Newsmax, News Nation, and now, of course, numero uno, and that is STS. A quick reminder, Facebook, Insta, Twitter, we're at Podcast STS. You can listen to us anywhere you listen to podcasts. The merch store is open. People are asking for cardboard cutouts of Carm, and that's tough to do, but I'm going to try to swing it somehow, some way, somehow. There's some breaking news with this, but before we get to that, Mac has seen it and done it all. And Mac, you kind of worked on, not on this case per se, but you helped report about it with your friend Nancy Grace. Tell us, how far back does that go? When did you first come into contact with this story?
Well, I actually started working on this case in 2005. I was with Beth almost from the very beginning. I've sat with her. I've cried with her. I've tried to advise her. It's one of those cases that sometimes you might can see it differently than the parent, obviously. Beth has been one of those folks that from the very beginning, she understood her child. So when people were saying things like, oh, she probably just was too drunk, she's going to sleep it off, she'll show back up in a day or two. You know, she might even have been taken, but they've drugged her. And once they're done with her, she'll be fine. You'll see her walking down the street. Beth knew from the minute they called her and told her that Natalee missed that flight, that something was terribly wrong. Natalee was dependable. She was responsible. She was the kind of kid that would show up 15 minutes early. So, you know, right from Jump Street, we knew we were probably looking at something, you know, much more horrific than a kid that missed a flight because she was hungover somewhere.
And have you kept in touch with Beth over the years? We actually reached out to her, did not hear back, but I'm going to try again. But
Sure.
Have you kept in touch with her?
Sure. I mean, I would consider her a friend at this point. You know, she's had a lot of people reach out to her and send different items to her, whether it's been long blonde hair, you know, a pillowcase, a t-shirt, you know, different items where people say, we think this is connected to Natalee's case. And I've always tried to kind of bring her back down to reality. We can test it. We can look at it. but more than likely, it's not going to be tied to this case at all. And I mean, I've tried to just be as honest with her as I've been on the shows. Men are generally A to B people. So if you've got a situation on a beach and you've got the ocean right there, that's probably where she is. They're not going to take somebody from a beach, put them in a car, and then drive around looking for a place to put them, to hide them, again, when you've got one of the best places in the world to do that right behind you. I just don't see that as, logical. But again, even when I went back to Aruba with Beth and Nancy, there was somebody there that before we went on the trip said, hey, we found this shoulder bone and we're just convinced it's Natalie's. And, Beth is a mama. So when is she going to stop looking? Never. When is she going to not test something? Never. When is she not going to look for any shred of that child? It ain't going to happen. Doesn't matter whether it's logical. Doesn't matter if I see it differently. So I think part of what my job kind of moved into was, is there something I can do to give her answers that's not going to cost her a lot of money? There was an expert that wanted $10,000 to tell her whether that bone matched the DNA and was Natalie. Well, in about 2 seconds, with a forensic expert, this an archaeologist, she looked right at it and said it's not even human. And that's investigation 101. Even in my police department, people call us because they find bones under their house if they're doing work, or they find bones if they're digging a swimming pool or something. And everybody thinks it's a human. It's rarely a human, but, make the call for sure. But the very first part of my job is to determine whether or not it's animal or human.
And so, Mac, your belief is that the body is somewhere in the ocean and it will probably never be discovered, you think?
100%. There's a thing out there called the Caribbean Wall. And if you've ever been to Aruba, you can walk out and just keep walking and you're still only knee deep in water. But if you go past that Caribbean Wall, it drops off like 70 something feet. So if they just went out a little bit and dumped anybody, you've got enough turtles and sharks. They're going to make quick work, sadly. And then the bones are going to be scattered everywhere. Because that's another thing. Y'all remember the time they were scuba diving and thought they found the skeletal remains on the bottom of the ocean floor? Mm-hmm. That's great in movies, but that's not going to happen here when you have a body that's floating and, decomposes and has animal activity. I mean, you're going to be spread out. So that was never going to happen.
And Dr. John Delatorre, the only way to really find out is to hear it from the proverbial horse's mouth. That is Joran van der Sloot. It's pronounced Sloot, by the way, not Sloot. And what are the chances of that happen? This guy is slippery, slimy, and probably not great.
It's almost zero. It's not zero, but he's not the kind of guy that is interested in tormenting. And he's not interested in the sort of pseudo limelight that some killers get from, knowing where a body is, and then just kind of using it to kind of get attention. So he's not either one of those guys. I agree that they probably just did the easiest thing that they could do, all three of them, which was dump the body in the ocean. And that's it. I mean, in some ways, he's probably thinking to himself, truthfully, I don't know where she is. Like in his mind, he's telling himself he doesn't actually know. He knows where he dumped her, but that's not where she is. And so asking him that question, it can come across as if he's telling you the truth, because truthfully, he doesn't actually know where the body is. So I think that's kind of how he rationalizes how he's doing what he's doing and why he's doing it.
Laura Waldy writes, "Hi, Joel, best guest in SCS Nation. This is a new case for me, so I look forward to learning about it. This was a story that was inevitable. It was ubiquitous everywhere on television back in the mid-2000s. You could not avoid it, even if you tried. Randy, I can hear those sweet sirens in New York City, and I hear it's raining there today.
Beautiful today.
Before we get into the legal aspects, what do you remember about this case most? And do you agree that we're never really going to find out where her remains are?
Well, let me work backwards. I don't know that we're ever actually going to find her, as much as the parents are entitled to closure. But I do think we may get the truth out of Mr. Vander Sloot. And I learn something new every day. And today I learned it is pronounced Sloot. I had a very interesting theory that I was completely disabused of a short while ago. Initially, I'm thinking to myself, Mr. Vander Sloot, is probably thrilled to get out of a Peruvian jail and come to the United States of America and be housed in a federal prison, or in Alabama, to the extent that there isn't any federal facility, in a state facility. And someone much smarter than me at dinner said, you think that he wants out of a Peruvian jail. How do you know that he hasn't paid off people? His father's got money. How do you know he's not protected, has whatever he needs in a Peruvian jail, and is living the life of Riley? And there is no way in God's green earth he wants to come to the United States, where Lord only knows where he will end up, where he could end up dead, because this is not a particularly popular crime in the United States to kill a teenage girl who's away for high school graduation. And then it dawned on me, either way, there is an angle here for Mr. Vander Sloot. Tell us the truth. Tell us what happened to Natalie. Tell us about a house that she was buried under that doesn't exist. We want to know the truth. Polygraph truth. Backed up with evidence truth. And then we have something to talk about. So he has a bargaining chip, to the extent that he either wants to stay here or he wants to go back. And that bargaining chip is the truth.
By the way, Copper Horse reminds us today is Memorial Day, everyone, and thank you to everyone who served and gave the ultimate sacrifice. I am echoing those sentiments. It's interesting you mentioned that, Randy, about paying for protection, because the breaking news today is that Joran Vander Sloot's attorney, on the eve of a possible extradition, although it looks like it's going to take a little bit longer, he was severely beaten in his Peruvian jail. His lawyer, a man named Maximo Altez, the lawyer, says he does not believe the beating was related to his client's expected extradition to the U.S. on extortion charges, but rather because of gang rules inside the Calapalca prison where he's currently being held. Back to you, John Della Torre. I don't know how if you even can, or how you diagnose this guy. He's obviously, cold, calculating in a lot of ways. How do you think he's faring outside of just getting the crap beat out of him in this prison? How do you think he fares in the prison system, especially in a place like Peru, like Randy was talking about?
Not very well. I mean, he's a prick, right? I imagine that whenever you interact with him,
he's a big,
he's
6'5".
Yeah, whenever you interact with him, you get this sense that this is just an icky guy that you don't really like being around. You can tell that he's thinking of all different kinds of ways in which he can hurt you. Like this guy likes the idea of power, but doesn't really know how to get it other than just because of who he is. So I think he doesn't fare very well. And I wouldn't be surprised if this was the first time, right? I think that there's probably been multiple times when he said something to someone that he shouldn't have said. Because it doesn't matter how tall you are, doesn't matter how big and bad you are. It's prison. There's always going to be someone that's bigger and badder, and that's how it's going to go down. So I wouldn't be surprised if he's been greenlit multiple times. I wouldn't be surprised if he's needed to have protective custody multiple times, for however that exists in Peru. But this is the kind of guy that gets under your skin and you really, really, really just want to smash a brick into his face.
That's very well said. I love it. As is what old lady Snoop writes here. Nancy Grace is hysterical. Please, can you get Nancy Grace for us? To talk to Mac about that. We've had her on. She's been on. I love Nancy Grace. I'll talk to Mac about getting Mac and Nancy on. And I won't even have to host. I'll just let it go. I'll just hand it over. But Max, according to this, according to this lawyer Altez, Vander Sloot is currently in the Peruvian prison's medical ward. And now the lawyer is requesting that he be moved to another prison for his own safety. There was talk about him being, which I'm going to get to Randy about being extradited as soon as tomorrow. It does not appear that's anywhere close to happening on these extortion charges. Do you think there was any ploy here? Anything funny going on here because that was about to happen? And maybe Randy is right. Maybe he is protected or was protected and doesn't want to come to the States to face justice. What's really going on here? Or is it just a prison brawl?
There is no chance this is not some kind of con. The timing is too remarkable for me. The other thing is he's been in prison since 2012. He don't know the gang rules yet. Of course he does. I'm a old housewife in Atlanta, and I know the gang rules. You don't go to the infirmary now when you're fixing to be extradited without it being something you wanted to happen. If you remember, he was stabbed once before. Some people said he did it to himself. You know, you can look at the sweater he was wearing at the time. It doesn't have any injury to it. So you might question, how was he stabbed 3 times and nobody hit that sweater at all? That seems kind of odd, right? As far as his life there, we know he's run drugs there. We know he has conjugal visits. He had a baby. He got married. I mean, when he gets to Alabama, that ain't going to happen. I guarantee you he ain't running drugs in Alabama, and he ain't going to have a conjugal visit. His life is going to be very, very different. And he's not going to be the man here at all. I promise you. And he knows that. He's the con artist of all time. Remember, you're talking about somebody that confessed at least 4 times to killing Natalee Holloway and was Teflon. They couldn't touch him. They wouldn't touch him.
All good points. Randy, what about this prison beating? I mean, the timing seems really suspect, as Mac just alluded to. Do you chalk it up to coincidence, or is there something more to it, do you think?
I don't believe in coincidences.
Amen.
I can't be any more clear than that. So to me, remarkable, as Max said, is a wonderful way of putting it. You can couch it any way you want. There is a reason why he is suddenly in the medical center on the eve of his extradition to the United States. And I don't think it was because the rest of the population was unhappy that he was getting an all expense paid trip to Alabama.
And it's not because he was devastated that Succession is now over, like you, Randy, and or Barry.
Devastated, though. I have to tell you, watching.
No spoiler alert.
No spoiler alert.
Are you going to be able to go on without Succession now, Randy?
It's not going to be easy, but I said the same thing about Miami Vice and The Sopranos and Entourage. So somehow I soldier on.
There'll always be another one. Except there's a strike now, so maybe not. Who knows? El Rose, I love the name. I love listening to Mac. Love to hear more about the trip to Aruba, followed here by Jory. The Holloways are wonderful parents that they immediately got on a flight to find Natalee. She was very involved right away. But again, just take us back to 2005. Did you get a call from Nancy? What prompted you to get on that plane? And what were you guys doing on the ground when you got there?
Well, I didn't take the trip then in 2005.
Oh, okay.
I was working with Beth from Alabama through the Cold Case Institute. So I didn't go to Aruba until just a couple of years ago with Nancy and Beth. And part of the reason Beth wanted to go is to make sure these new group of graduates understood the dangers. And she made such incredible points, like most parents that send a child on an incredible trip, you know, they get all the money together, they make sure the child's got the passport, they make sure they've got brand new clothes, whatever, and send them on the trip. And she said very few parents check to make sure their passport is up to date. And do they have enough room on a credit card or some cash money in case this child goes missing or has some type of issue? Can you get to them? And that was a really valid point. And she was making this point in this rental car that Nancy was driving on the island of Aruba. And I'm thinking to myself, I know for a fact that my husband's passport is not up to date. So if something had happened to me there in Aruba, my husband could not have gotten to me. He would have had to figure that out first. So it's things like that, you know, you should keep in the forefront of your mind. But that's something that Beth has championed almost immediately when she found out your consulate and your embassy, they are not your go-to. They are not a police force. They're not somebody that's going to be able to help you really to find out what happened to your child. And she found out, of course, the most horrible way ever when she needed the most help.
And then Max, staying with you here from North Ireland, Nincompoop, and this question has come in a couple of times. Was it confirmed she was actually on the beach? I mean, it's hard not to be on the beach in Aruba, right? And then this is a difficult question if you want to couple them together. Doesn't a body normally float up like Lacey Peterson?
Yes. The answer is yes, unless it's so deep, like I'm telling you, and with the shark activity and the turtle activity, there wouldn't be anything to float up. The body would have been ripped apart. If you go to where the lighthouse is, which is one of the first things that they all said, Sloot and the Capo brothers, they all mentioned going to the lighthouse, showing her the sharks. They mentioned that specifically. If that's where she was taken offshore, there would be no way that would happen. This is not a body that you toss in a lake and drifts, 8 to 10 feet and floats back up in 3 days. That is not this situation.
Tali checking in from Israel, as is another STS nation member. So good to see Israel represented. For those who don't know the case that well, Joran van der Sloot, he was long suspected in the disappearance and death of Natalee Holloway. She was, as we mentioned, visiting Aruba in 2005. He has never been charged in her death, but on the 5-year anniversary of her going missing in 2010, he was convicted of killing this other woman, which is why he's spending 28 years in a Peruvian prison. Beth Holloway has really just spoken via statements. I'm going to read this and then see if Dr. Delatorre can weigh in. She said recently, "I was blessed to have had Natalee in my life for 18 years. And as of this month, I've been without her for exactly 18 years. That was from earlier in May. She would be 36 years old now. It's been a very long and painful journey, but the persistence of many is going to pay off. Together, we are finally getting justice for Natalee." John, you deal with, human emotions, people's mindset. Is there anything harder for a parent than dealing with this kind of still not knowing 100% for sure what happened to your child?
No, there's nothing harder. And it wouldn't have mattered if Natalee had gone missing when she was 36 years old, right? It was going to be the same level of distress for her mother. It doesn't matter if Natalee was 8 years old, right? So the idea is that there's a Natalee-sized hole in her heart, right? And so she's going to, anybody needs to kind of fill it the best way that they can, right? And that's this idea of closure. And closure means different things for different people. So you can't have just one definition. And some people never get it, at least not in the definition that they want to use. So it's important that I think she finds other ways of keeping Natalee's memory alive, but also memorializing Natalee, but also kind of moving forward. You have to continue to live her life. And next year she's going to be gone longer than she was alive. And that's going to be a very different experience for her mother. And it's the emotions are going to be very different then. So my hope is that she's talking to someone regularly to help her go through what her grieving process and what her closure, what the things that she needs, and how she needs it.
And Mac, you're a mama bear, as you say. Hearing this, I was blessed to have Natalie in my life for 18 years. I've been without her for exactly 18 years now. How does that hit you as a mom?
Well, I mean, of course, it just guts you, right? But I'll tell you what happened. There was a story that Beth tells when she's on the island, and she's at that moment where she just almost feels like her nerves are on the outside of her skin. Like she wants to be able to rest, but she can't. She wants to be in one place and at the hotel in case Natalie comes back, but yet she can't be there any longer. Like she just doesn't know what to do. And so she decides to go outside, and there's one taxi. And normally there's a string of them, but there's just one. And she gets in the car and she says, "Take me to a church." And they drive and they drive and they drive. And she says that she looks out the window of the taxi and there's a cross on the side of the road. And she screams, "Let me out." And she goes to this cross and she just falls to her knees and she just starts beating the ground. And she just starts screaming, "Give her back." Well, I mean, as a mom, you can't even listen to this without choking up and she's telling me and Nancy this, and she said, then there's another cross about 50 feet, and she literally crawls to it. And she's still screaming at God to give her back to me. And as she goes up this hill, there's cross after cross after cross. And she said she can hear the rocks under the tires where the man driving the taxi is just slowly going with her, not saying a word, not doing anything. And I don't remember how many crosses there were, but as each cross, she said she got a little more peace, just a little. And that at the end, when she was in front of the chapel on this beautiful hill overlooking the ocean, she said that she knew in that moment that she was gone. She knew it. And so Nancy and I sat with her in front of that chapel while she told us that story. And I could already not hardly look at her. You know what I mean? And then she said the most incredible thing. And this is what I would like the other, two guests to talk about. Because when you talk about closure and you talk about, for a mama, is there a chance? Okay. So then she says this. She said, y'all are going to think I'm crazy. And she touched both her hands and she said, Natalie's passport is in my purse right now, just in case. Well, there's nothing else you can say.
Randy, you're a hardened New Yorker, a very savvy criminal defense attorney. Just on an emotional standpoint, what's it like to hear that the pain that the mothers obviously went through and is still going through?
It's beyond my intellectual, emotional, and any other capacity to be able to weigh in on. Empathy can only take you so far. So since I am lucky enough to have never suffered anything even close to what the Holloways have suffered, I've lost my keys. I've lost my mother and my father-in-law. To lose a child, I can't tell you that I know what it feels like, but I am reminded there was a very, very, very well-renowned prosecutor out of Nassau County, New York, Bill Dempsey, and he had this booming, this presence, this commanding voice. And he got up in front of the jury in a homicide case and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, only God gets to decide who lives and who dies." And that always stayed with me. Mm. But I will say this, and call me crazy. Who am I to say that Natalie can't show up somewhere? Is it impossible? Right. And maybe that's a curse as much as it is a blessing. And it also reminds me of a murder trial. And this could be folklore. It was a murder trial. And the defense attorney hears the door open because it was a homicide where the body was never recovered. And the door to the back of the courtroom opens up, and the defense attorney stands up and says, Your Honor, how do we know right now that that is not the victim walking in the door? Everybody turned around except for the defendant.
Wow. Wow. That's smart and powerful. Wow. To you, Dr. John Delatorre, Mac wanted you to weigh in as well. What about hearing, that story that you just shared with us about Beth?
I think a lot of it has to do, well, my experience of the story is that I feel distressed hearing that story, and I feel distressed in a number of ways. But I think it also lends to, how do we talk to individuals who are experiencing something like that when we haven't? And our words have a peculiar power when it comes to this, particularly when we say things like, well, I've never lost a child. Her mother can come back and say, my child wasn't lost. My child was taken. And so I think that's where the first thing is, when we're with someone like that, who's experiencing high levels of emotion like that, the first thing is just keep your mouth shut. Right? Don't say anything, right? Because there is no perfect thing to say. So just don't say anything. Probably touch their shoulder, touch their hand, touch their knee, right? Give them a hug, ask first. And then the next thing is, allow them to have whatever emotion that they want to have. If she wants to be angry and wants to break stuff, hey, I'm going to go get a couple bottles of beer and, you can smash those glasses, right? Or if they just want to be sad, or if they want to have hope, let them have it, right? Because as was said, we live in a world of infinite possibilities. So anything is possible. We don't live in a world of infinite probability. So the probability that we will have the possibility that we want is very limited. So just let them experience it, whatever it is, and be there for them for whatever it is, right? Just allow them, say it's normal, right? You want to do something, hey, let's go do it. We're not going to break any laws, but hey, let's just go do that thing. And just kind of let them go through it. Because what you're going to realize is that it's not going to last very long, right? The emotional state that you're in, it's not going to last very long. It seems like it's lasting forever, but it's not. And so then they understand, while you may not have had your child taken away from them, you've been with them through an intense emotional experience, and that bond is going to be strong. While you might not share the same memories or experiences, you now shared something together, and that is going to enrich the relationship. And I think that's ultimately what people want, is the relationships that they do still have to be that much more enriched, not common, but enriched through that shared experience.
Very well said. Yori comments to you, Mac. Joran's mother trying to have him committed to a psych facility. I vaguely remember this before he killed that poor girl in Peru. This speaks volumes about him. And then this comment here, Joran's father is dead. His mother has nothing to do with him. Do you remember when she was trying to get that accomplished by sending him to a psych hospital?
Vaguely,
Yeah.
But again, you're talking about somebody that knew this child. She knew that he was 17 and getting bartenders to help him slip people Rohypnol. She knew. Everybody on the island knew. That's how they found him. Because when they were going to the hotel and they went to Carlos and Charlie's, everybody was like, oh yeah, that's Joran Vandersloot. Like, everybody knew he was running a game. He lied about his age. He lied about where he was from. He said he was 19 or something and from the Netherlands. He was 17, living right on that island. He had, been playing poker the night or two before with his dad. So it's not like his dad didn't know he was in there doing things illegal. This is, behavior that, I've heard rumors about some of the things he did at age 5, age 10. So, whatever she was trying to do after Natalie, it's kind of too late. And he already knew the game. He already knew the con. Look what he does. He tells Beth, I'll tell you where she's at for $225,000, but I want $25,000 up front. So they do that. He takes that money to go to Peru to enter this poker tournament where he murders Stephany Flores 5 years to the day. May 30th. Again, no accidents, no coincidences. This is you. This is who you are.
Yeah. And that is, I'm glad you reminded them. That's why he's serving this 28-year prison sentence. The other victim is she was a Lima College student, Stephany Flores. And again, as Mac just said, killed 5 years to the day after Natalie's disappearance. Randy, to you, sliding into some of the legal aspects here. In a federal affidavit, Joran Sloot went on to admit that he had been with Natalie on the night of May 29th, 30th, 2005, and that he had, quote unquote, thrown her to the ground after she'd attempted to stop him from leaving. He then changed that story. But simply from a legal standpoint, what is saying this in a federal affidavit, what kind of weight does that hold legally?
Well, it really depends on where we are. If he were being tried in the United States for her homicide, then that would be an admission. It would be the subject of a hearing to determine whether or not he was, as we like to say, read his Miranda warnings. Was he in custody and being interrogated? It would be subject to whether or not it was voluntarily made. But since he's coming to the United States based upon having been charged with extortion and having been charged with wire fraud, the utility of that statement is really not great unless his defense is going to be, I didn't extort anyone. I didn't commit or make a material misrepresentation of fact because remember, with wire fraud, anytime you use the wires, wiring money, in furtherance of a scheme, in furtherance of making misrepresentations in order to get something from someone, if you use the wires, that is a federal crime. That carries with a statutory maximum of 20 years. Believe it or not, the extortion charge, which is also a federal crime, the blackmail charge, only carries a maximum of 1 year. So, as I stated earlier, I'm very curious to see which way the coin is going to fall, heads or tails. Is it a matter of, I want to stay in Peru, I don't want to come to Alabama, or I want to get the hell out of Peru and come to Alabama? The 1 year doesn't really help him, but the 20 years, to the extent that he would want to stay here, his bargaining chip to stay here would be to actually tell the truth as to what happened to Natalee Holloway. But that declaration, that affidavit in and of itself only matters to the extent that he were to be on trial for her homicide.
I'm going to get back to Randy on some more details because I found out some stuff today that I didn't realize, and I'm going to ask him about that. But Dr. John Delatorre, back to you from Yori, I'm not sure which. Antisocial personality disorder, that is her diagnosis, followed by Patricia Burns. Joran Sloot is a type of killer that enjoys the fact that he's the only one that knows where Natalie's body is. Any of these ring true to you? Either that or the antisocial personality disorder?
I mean, I could see it. I need more background on Joran in order to get. So it's not as simple as just because someone commits a crime or someone commits a murder that automatically makes them antisocial or
but how does that square with? Because it's very interesting. We have another homicide that we can look to where he's been convicted of that. So when you look at the facts of the Flores case and the fact that the body was not only found, but the body was found in his hotel room, how would that square with a diagnosis such as he enjoys being the only one who knows what happened? And is there something to link? Look, listen, how often do we see a situation where you have someone who's being accused or not yet accused of a homicide, having been already convicted of a homicide?
Yeah, so I think it's important to understand. Number one, I don't think he actually remembers because I don't think he cares. He's not the kind of serial killer that keeps a memento, right? He's also not a serial killer. I'm just saying that he's not the type of guy that I think thinks about it all the time. I think he did something and then he lets it go. I think he does what he wants when he wants. Now, is that antisocial? I mean, it could be, but it seems more impulsive. Now, we have intermittent explosive disorder. Now, this is the kind of guy or kind of person that, you know, something triggers them. And so then they act out aggressively, right? But they only do it intermittently, right? They only do it under a certain set of circumstances. Someone with antisocial personality disorder, they don't need to have committed a crime. They don't even need to have committed a murder in order to get ASPD. I think what we're trying to, I think what the public tries to get is that if someone is willing to commit a heinous atrocity against another human, that they must have some kind of psychopathology. What I'm trying to say is that more often than not, they don't, right? That's not what they have. They don't care about people, right? That's who, and you cannot care about people from one moment to the next moment. So it's not necessary that he have a personality disorder. Could he have a mental disorder? He absolutely could. Could he have antisocial personality disorder? He could have that too. Could he have been raised by parents who gave him everything, who never allowed him to be challenged by the world, and so he feels entitled? He feels that because he's a man, he can just get whatever he wants, right? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all of those things can be true. I think the reality is that we want to give someone psychopathology because I think it makes it easier for us to understand who this person is. When the reality is that he's pretty easy to understand without the pathology. He doesn't care about people. He never cares about people. He only cares about what benefits him. And that, whatever that is, changes moment to moment. Is that a personality disorder? I guess it could be. But again, I need to spend more time with him because it's too simple for me. And Joel knows I hate being reductive. Yeah. And so it's too simple for me to just give him this thing and then call it a day. I need to spend more time with him because I don't think he has a personality disorder. I think he has personality traits that make him a real problem to interact with society. But what is that? I mean, that could be any number of things. And so if you were to ask me to evaluate this guy, I absolutely 100% would be. And my first instinct would be to say, I need to look for a conduct disorder when he was a child so that I can get the antisocial personality disorder when he's an adult. That's what I need to be looking for. And I think I can get there. But just saying that someone who commits 2 murders has a personality disorder, I think removes the responsibility that they have of choice. They didn't have to kill these people. They chose to. And that's not a mental disorder. That is responsibility. And so I would never be on the side that because he has this personality disorder, because he has something that he doesn't have responsibility, that he didn't know what he was doing was wrong. He knew what he was doing was wrong. He just didn't care.
Yeah, Mac, I was going to ask you, I mean, what would you like to see happen to him? Or is he already, being punished enough by virtue of being in a Peruvian prison? Is there any other punishment that you like to see exacted on him?
Well, I mean, there's nothing you can do to him that's going to equal what he did to the Holloways. But, the system says that he should be locked up for his natural life. And, I agree with that. I mean, I think he needs to be away from other innocent people because I think that he had the way he attacked people was planned to the point that he knew that he would not attack these people until the night before they were leaving. And he knew that most people, women, were not going to miss a plane to go to the police to talk about a sexual assault and stay in a foreign country, that they were going to take that flight home no matter what happened to them the night before. What occurred with Natalie, something interrupted that plan, whether she had the seizure, like he said, something happened that changed it. What I would have liked to have seen immediately is with the Calpo brothers, only arrest the youngest one. Only arrest him. I think he would have caved very, very quickly if he had been in jail by himself, didn't have the benefit of talking to, Vandersloot's dad, who allegedly was a judge and all those things and had understanding. I think if he had been separated from his brother and didn't have days and days and days to get stories together, send each other emails like they were at home at the time she went missing. There was a lot of things that happened, again, only, in my opinion, a seasoned criminal would have thought to do.
And Mac is talking about Satish and Deepak Kalpo. And if you follow the case, they were in the news a lot too. Two brothers in Aruba. They were arrested under suspicion that maybe they had something to do with it. And then because of a lack of evidence, they were ultimately let go. I have no idea where those two guys are in the world. But Anna Lisette updating us here saying that Joran's dad died of a heart attack while playing tennis. And Joran's mom returned to the Netherlands and restarted her life. Joran's brothers are doing good. So, their family moves on to an extent. By the way, Greta Van Susteren did amazing reporting on this. She would be a great guest to get, according to Demi. That is Steve Cohen, crack booking producer. Steve, better have Greta for Wednesday. Randy, back to you here. I run a tight ship, Randy. So this extradition order gets a little complicated. First question, I guess, well, just to break it down. So a Peruvian executive order earlier this month paved the way for Joran to be extradited to the U.S. Again, it could have happened as early as tomorrow. He's in a hospital ward in a prison, so it doesn't look like it's going to happen. But he's accused of telling Beth Holloway that he would lead her to Natalie's body in exchange for $250,000. That's what we call mega chutzpah. Killed this young girl and then is asking for money. Holloway, Beth Holloway, actually paid Joran Vandersloot $25,000 as a down payment, only to find out that he lied about the location of Natalie's remains. At one point, he said that the body was buried in the foundation of a house in Aruba. So there's all these details. But, Randy, from a legal perspective, as an attorney, how skeptical must you be of this person? And, even in trying to extradite him here, as we're seeing, there's shady business going on. Are you confident that he eventually will be extradited? How difficult is that process?
Well, the process itself, extradition, is somewhat of a simple process. Putting aside whether we're talking about extraterritorial, in other words, you have someone outside of the United States that the United States wants to bring back in. Without getting too deeply into the weeds in terms of treaties and not having treaties, and we hear, if I'm going to split, I want to go to a place that doesn't have an extradition treaty with the United States. But let's assume, and it's reasonable here, that there is Peruvian United States recognition. We have a treaty, we've signed off, and we will honor an extradition request. All that needs to be proven in terms of getting someone back to the United States is confirming their identity. Is this the person that we want to bring back to the United States? And then after that, it's really a matter of just ensuring that the crime, and this is where things get a little hanky sometimes, or hinky, whatever the word is the crime that the person is accused of committing in the United States one that the country where the person is recognizes as a crime we run into instances where sometimes, particularly with financial crimes, what is a financial crime in the United States isn't necessarily a financial crime someplace else, or not necessarily a crime that the treaty recognizes is one that the country where the person is willing to say, go ahead, he's all yours. So it seemed like here with Mr. Vandersloot, it was pretty simple. We've confirmed his identity, and the criminal conduct is one that is recognized in Peru. And it may very well be that Peru was happy to get rid of him. And that's an aside. That's not a legal matter. But legally, is it him? And is it a crime that's recognized in our extradition treaty? Check off the boxes. Yes, he's gone. So again, we talked about this earlier. I don't believe any of us, I don't believe anyone with a pulse would believe that he just has the worst luck of anyone in the world, that of all the times to have gotten the crap kicked out of him, it just happens to be as his suitcase is being packed for his one-way ticket to the United States.
Randy, do you feel extra pressure or burden? Let's say Beth Holloway was your client and you were trying to get him back. Knowing what you went through, does it put added pressure on you?
I don't think that there's anything that is ever going to put added pressure on anyone, attorney, friend, family member, anyone who is in the Holloway's orbit. And I will tell you, what Dr. Delatorre said before was one of the coolest things I've ever heard. And I do learn something new. This is now the second thing I learned that I didn't know before today. The way that Dr. Delatorre described that there are some times where there's nothing you can say is going to help. You're just going to screw it up. So just don't say anything. I never really recognized that as a possibility. I think you could tell I don't have a problem talking. And human nature being what it is, we always feel compelled to say something. But sometimes all you can do is screw up. I mean, what are you going to say? I know how you feel. Really? And even if you do know how I feel, is that really helpful right now? So saying nothing and just giving the hug is one of the most profound things that I have heard in a really, really long time. And I'm going to remember that. But the point is, added pressure. How could there be any more pressure to do anything for the Holloways? Talk about trying to manage expectations and threading a needle and dancing between raindrops and any other analogy that you can give. I don't think there's anything that's going to make it more difficult to sit there and take on the responsibility of representing a human being who, and I'm going to say it the way I should, had a child taken from her.
Excellently said. And I'm going to pay Delatorre to tell my mom about the saying nothing part. That would come in handy for me. To you, Dr. D, his daddy isn't around to fix it all for him. There are a lot of comments here about how his father enabled him in a lot of ways. There's apparently stories when he was a younger teen, his dad bailing him out. Is that just a dad being a dad, or is that a dad, as I just used the word, enabling a son who's a little you-know-what to be a worse you-know-what?
I think that's actually a far thinner line than we recognize it being, right? Because the reality is that we all want our fathers to help us get through whatever shenanigans we end up getting into. The problem becomes is our father actually teaching us how to accept responsibility for the shenanigans that we find ourselves in? So if there's no follow through when it comes to, hey, you made this serious mistake, now you have to pay a consequence for it. Now you should be paying a heavier consequence, but because of who I am, You're going to be paying a lighter one, but that doesn't mean that you're not paying one. Then I think he did create a situation in which Vandersloot could grow up to be this. And here's another trick when it comes to diagnosing. We actually have a diagnosis called adult antisocial behavior, not antisocial personality disorder. Adult antisocial behavior. This is just someone who commits crime after crime after crime. They're what we call career criminals. And so I think that if there's no follow through from your father, then it creates a scenario in which you're not learning the responsibility that you need to learn in order to develop as a fully functioning human being. So it's certainly possible that the father thought he was doing what he needed to do to protect his son, which is what we want fathers to do, but didn't do what he needed to do in order to help his son grow up to be a responsible human being.
Suzanne T writes, I live near Natalie's hometown and can remember the blue bows throughout the community for years after her disappearance. Her family, friends, and community need answers, and he, Joran Vandersloot, has them. Just got back from Saturday from my 6th visit to Aruba. I think of Natalie every time I was there, and thought of her as well when I was there. It's hard to associate Aruba with her in a way. To you, Mac, you don't really see Beth in the news much anymore, even now with this extradition possibly about to happen. Is she just laying low? Does she feel like, at one point, I'm sure the media could have played a role in helping, people around Joran to maybe speak or spill information? Is that just kind of like going up and down escalator at this point for her? And is she just kind of hanging low, as I said?
Well, we've only texted since the news broke. I think we spoke once by phone, but the majority is text messages. I can only imagine maybe she's laying low because for the first time in a courtroom, she's going to face him. And for the first time, she's going to have to testify. Well, that's unnerving for anybody. I mean, you think how you felt the first time you got a traffic ticket and had to go to court. You don't really know what's going on. You're a little nervous. What's going to happen? There's all these other people around. Well, she's experiencing that. She's not privy to the timing more than the rest of us are. She's probably not going to know he's on Alabama soil till they tell her, and he's probably, already locked up safely. She's not going to have a heads up. So she's probably on pins and needles a little bit. When is it going to happen? What's going to, be the course of action for me? When do we go to court? She's probably a little, I would be a little off kilter about it. And, she's still a school teacher. So this is what her summer break is going to be filled with.
Yeah. Back to John Delatorre's comment. There's really, I was going to say something, and I have 3 kids. There's nothing you can really say because it must just be torture, what she's gone through. Marina in the south of Spain, I don't think you can ever sleep again thinking about your child's last moments. I personally don't even want to think about that. But Randy, to you. So kind of digging into the extradition here, and we'll go a little bit longer, and then we'll wrap it on a Memorial Monday. So back in 2010, a federal grand jury in Birmingham indicted Joran Vandersloot on charges of extortion and wire fraud. 2010, it's now 2023. That's 13 years that Beth Holloway has probably had her hopes up. He is going to, the way I understand this is what kind of threw me for a loop. I thought he would be coming back here permanently, but the way I understand it, he's going to be sent here temporarily for the trial, and then allegedly will be sent back to Peru to fill his sentence there of 28 years, in which case he would return to America in 2038 to serve up to 40 additional years. So she could have to wait potentially, Beth Holloway, from 2010 to 2038. That's 28 years till she sees Joran Vandersloot in a U.S. prison. How does all this play out in your crystal ball? Is there a way to keep him here once he's here, or no?
I think that there is, and I will circle back to what I think I said at the beginning, which is if there is a deal to be made, and to the extent that Mr. Vandersloot would prefer to spend the last half or third of his life in the United States, to me, if he is willing to trade the truth for the ability to stay here, I would imagine that our government would use its resources and make its best efforts to reach an accommodation with the Peruvian authorities to keep him here. Also keeping in mind that to the extent that there is an admission made with regard to what happened to Natalee Holloway, that is a crime that was committed in Aruba. So now you've got the Aruba authorities weighing in, and then they too would have to be part of a conversation where, okay, he can stay in the United States. This is what we're getting in exchange, which we would hope would be the truth. And far be it for me to say closure for someone else, but I think we can talk generically that if that's the only closure to be gotten, that closure is worth something. So yes, I do believe that there are ways that he can stay here if we want to diagnose Mr. Vandersloot as someone who's selfish and puts his own self-interest above anyone else's. Well, if he wants to stay here, there's a way for him to stay here. Conversely, if he wants to go back, he can use that same bargaining chip, which is, hey, you want the truth? You want like sodium pentothal truth? You want sodium pentothal polygraph truth? Well, this is what I want. And what I want is I want to go back to Peru. There's a deal to be made.
Wow. So it could cut either way. In either scenario, who would really lean on him, and how do you really know what he's thinking, I guess?
Possession is 9/10 of the law. Who's ever got him physically has him. That's going to be who's got the leverage, coupled with where he wants to be or where he doesn't want to be. So there's a couple of moving parts, but the truth is, if he truly knows what happened to Natalee Holloway, then he's got the power. For once in his life, and I know we talked about this earlier, that he doesn't know how to use his power. For once in his life, he has an opportunity to use his power to help himself, and I dare say it, to help the Holloway family.
But Randy, this guy has lied repeatedly. Who's to believe what he says? Now, let's just say hypothetically, I tossed her in the ocean. That could never really be corroborated, right? You just have to.
That's not necessarily true. First of all, we do have the technology of a polygraph, and there are some FBI examiners out there who are pretty good at what they do. And while it may not be admissible quite yet in a court of law, it is used. And it is respected by the government as long as it's done on their terms. And by the way, there may be other evidence that we don't know about. There may be other witnesses, not necessarily co-conspirators, but people who he can say, listen, they saw me there, or he could tell a story with sufficient precision where someone like Matt could go and retrace those steps and say, you know something, it does add up. It does make sense. But of course, the truth would have to be tested. But hopefully, Joran Vandersloot is smart enough to know that he played a bad hand last time with the Holloways, and he got burned pretty quickly and pretty easily. So this time around, he's got an opportunity to have a mulligan here. So I dare say he's probably smart enough to recognize that he can't go back to that well again and tell a story about a body being buried under a house that hadn't been built yet.
June, I live in Alabama and have followed this from the beginning. Beth's strength and faith is beautiful, followed by, and I'm not reading this because of the comment, maybe a little bit, outstanding panel with the greatest host. I graduated high school from Mountain Brook, tragic case. That is Natalee Holloway's high school, I guess near or around the Birmingham area. So Beth and David Holloway, who are divorced, by the way, and were divorced, I think, back in 93. Beth Holloway continues. It has been a long and painful journey, but the persistence of many is going to pay off, Beth said. Together, we are finally going to get justice for Natalee. She traveled to South America to confront Joran van der Sloot in jail, and then recalled years later that she found him so, quote unquote, pathetic. I almost saw him as this pathetic person. She said on Dr. Oz back in 2017, I didn't feel any hate. Mac, did you speak to her around that time when she went to visit him? And was that indeed her reaction, that she was just thought he was this loser, basically?
You know, let me tell you about Beth. She relies on faith, hope, and love. She'll tell you. That's how she tries to live her life. I've never heard her speak horribly about anybody, not his parents, even though she knew at the time they were withholding information from her. They wouldn't tell her when he got home, what he did, none of that. They protected him, wouldn't let him really talk to her or the group that was with her. You know, my best memory of her, even before and after this, was she took him a candy bar. I don't know if y'all remember that. But she found out what his favorite candy was, and she knew he hadn't had it in however many years. So that, to me, speaks more about her. And it's that kind of thing. That's what I see of her. Even when all of this was said and done, the end of the story in front of the chapel, you know, here she, you know, yelling for God to give her back. But she said at the end, she knew she had to give her back to him. So that's how she lives her life. Even though, again, there's that chance. And as a mama, if she thinks there's a bone out there or a strand of hair or sighting of any kind, she's not going to ignore it.
Kelly Kay, man, I remember this movie. Every single teenager needs to watch the movie Midnight Express along with their parents before they travel to other countries. It's about a bunch of teens who get stuck, I think it's in Turkey, with drugs on them, and it is not a pleasant experience. So it's a good deterrent right there. My kids are still too young. Marshall Dove reminding us about today. Hey, Joel and panel chat friends, happy Memorial Day. Thinking of my grandfather today. He served in World War II. Bless our military veterans. So good reminder once again. So while Beth Holloway was very optimistic, her father, Dave, spoke to E! News back in 2021 and said that he concluded it would be an absolute waste of time to go visit Joran van der Sloot. He says, I don't blame Beth for going, but she didn't get any answers either. I'd be wasting my time and effort doing the same. I mean, to you, Dr. John De La Torre, how difficult must that be for a parent? Like, I would want to turn over every stone, every leaf, leave nothing untouched. But he's basically saying this guy is not going to do crap for me. Why even bother to go? If I'm able to, which I'm not, to Randy's point, your point, but for a millisecond, put myself in those shoes. It would be so frustrating to me to know that there is someone out there that has the answer and I just can't get it.
Yeah, and it's once again it's one of those things where you have to be able to put yourself in someone else's position, right? That on one hand, we have someone that's willing to go and move heaven and earth in order to find the truth. And then we have another person that's, you know, saying to themselves, I understand that there's a truth out there, but it's not for me. And these are two aspects of the spectrum of ways in which anybody would be experiencing a tragedy like this. So it's not to say that he should be more active, right? That he's not a good person because he's not being more. I'm not saying that because I don't believe things like that. I believe that we never know how we're going to act in any situation until we're in that situation. And so putting aside expectations, the reality is that he can't devote the necessary emotional energy into doing that, moving heaven and earth to finding the truth, while also trying to move forward with his life. And at the end of the day, right? Because here we are at the end of the day. At the end of the day, it's really about moving, right? You have to move with your life. And some people, they're okay with the knowledge that they're not going to get the truth for some scenario that occurred in their life. And other people, they're not okay with that. And that's what makes us human, right? Whichever one makes us human.
Sky Ricky, this has come up a few times, Mac. Joran's father must have helped him dump her into the ocean, and his mother must have known and just wanted to protect them both after Natalie died, and they probably think accidentally and covered up. But a bunch of people on here are saying the mother must know something. Do you believe she does?
Well, she certainly knew what the time frame was when he left and when he got home. She certainly knew the conversation in the kitchen with the father. She knew exactly what happened that night as far as a timeline. She knew the next day. She knew. There's no chance she didn't know. Even when Beth went and met with the two of them, they were sitting at the dining room table, little breakfast nook, not a big dining room table. She said that the dad was just like sweating profusely and was nervous, and the mom's hand was shaking and she was tearing up and they were so sad. And she, Beth gave him a bracelet, because they were looking for Natalie. They had bracelets made. And, I think in that moment, Beth knew. I think they showed the world what they were about when they wouldn't help and the police turned their back. Even when we went years ago, the police tried to arrest us for searching then. And I remember Nancy Grace told him, she went, let me get this straight. You're going to arrest us after being here 15 minutes, but you can't arrest Vandersloot in 15 years? I mean, so that's what she's put up with. That island, they closed ranks pretty quick because, again, the people that have come out and talked, everybody knew his playbook. And don't forget, he wrote a book and he was so slick. He thought, oh, nobody will ever know. I'll write it in Dutch. Like nobody speaks Dutch but you. Come on. So he took the OJ route, which, again, it just makes you look like a POS, in my opinion. And it makes you look, again, this was not an accident. This was not something that, you couldn't have somehow got her help, or you could have taken a different route. And you, again, like y'all have all said tonight, he chose not to help her. If she did have some type of reaction and was having a seizure, that's a medical thing. You don't have to just throw her in the water. So,
yeah. Bundy data to you, Delatorre. Why do prominent people's children feel privileged or act out? Speaking of that, we're doing tomorrow night. We've got the actual prison guard who was watching over Lyle and Eric Menendez. He's coming on to talk about that experience. He's got some interesting things to say about them. He spent a lot of time with them. Is this a universal truth? Rich, prominent people's children all screwed up or what?
Yes. And if I really want to say what I want to say, I think our audience is probably going to get turned off because I'm going to get real woke, real feminist, real down with the patriarchy here in a second and say, it's not just prominent people that feel privileged or act out. There are a lot of people that feel privileged and act out. And it's a real problem in our society. And I think we are seeing it more prevalent how much the problem has been and for how long the problem has been. But it's not only limited to prominent people.
Yeah, well put. I think our friend Mac just either had to bounce off or got bounced off. We're going to wrap in just 1 second. Final thing for you, John Delatorre. Once again, we see it with Brian Kohberger. The attorney, for whatever reason, after saying he got the crap beat out of him in prison, also went on to say that he has fans, Joran van der Sloot, from around the world sending him letters, so many that they had to create a P.O. box for him. He gets something like $400 a month in euros and other, monies from these adoring fans. And not only that, he got married and fathered a child while incarcerated, and now he's divorcing that wife for a quote-unquote prettier and younger girlfriend. Why the lawyer would want to say that, I do not know. Why the hell are people sending these guys photos?
It's very complicated. I think a lot of people are latching onto this term hybristophilia, which is where you kind of have sexual gratification from individuals who would commit pretty serious crimes. Generally, those are murder. Sometimes it's rape. But it's not unheard of for individuals in the community to latch on to someone through what I'm going to call overly empathic means. What I mean by that is sometimes, in particular, women can feel a sense of caregiving. And so they'll latch on to one of these guys that are in prison. Oh, I can change them, or I can take care of them. It's not necessarily for sexual gratification. It's just over empathizing with what's going on with them. There are other guys, there are other men who just believe that the person in prison was entitled to do whatever it was that they did, and they would have done the exact same thing. Once again, that goes back to my statement about it's not just prominent people. So it's not as simple as to say that there's sexual gratification the entire time. I do think that there are, but it really is that, of course he wants it because he likes the attention, and of course he's going to accept it. And of course he's going to, find the younger, person because that's what he wants. Right. And so he's going to get what he wants.
Randy, why the hell is his lawyer even mentioning this? Is he just trying to distract? What's going on here? Is he just a dope?
It's probably a question better put to the good doctor. It never ceases to amaze me, the ability of us just to completely screw up by opening our mouths, in particular where there is a camera or a microphone in front of us. I don't know if it's a matter of wanting to say something that is just so cool, or say something that is so profound, or just say something that's going to make us notice, make us famous, make people go, oh my God. I don't know what it is, but there seems to be a lot of that goes around. I would invite that attorney to actually watch what he said. And if his sphincter doesn't tighten and close, then someone needs to check a pulse, because there was no place for that. There was no reason to say that. There was nothing strategic about that. To me, that was just completely disregarding the fact that God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, and we need to listen a lot more and talk a lot less. And just, people say the strangest things sometimes when that light gets turned on.
Very, very well said. North Ireland nincompoop. There was a carm-shaped hole on YouTube yesterday. I apologize for that. What's the crake with that? That's got to be Irish speak. Staff holiday. It is Memorial Day weekend. Carm refused to work. She will be back next week. And then I'm going to tell you plans for the summer, because good old Carm is traveling to a foreign land. So we might have to do coffee with Carm on Sundays. My idea, her idea to travel and screw up the summer, but we'll make it work somehow. I want to give a big thanks to Sheryl McCollum. She is an active crime scene investigator with the Atlanta PD. She's also does a million other things, including helps people with her cold case foundation, people like Beth Holloway. So thank you to her. And then we've got John Delatorre, the inimitable Dr. John Delatorre, PsyD. He's a licensed psychologist in Texas, Arizona, and New York State. He's also a psychological analyst for TV shows, frequently on Court TV, and he's a clinical traumatologist. Your final thoughts here, Doc, and also from Shivani, I think she makes a good point. Van der Sloot and the truth are strangers to each other, seems to me. Is this accurate?
Yeah, I do think it's fairly accurate, but mostly because he doesn't care about the truth.
Is he a psychopath, as this person says?
Again, certainly possible. And it's one of those things that there are concentric circles when it comes to conduct disorder, to antisocial personality disorder, and the innermost circle is psychopathy. These can be assessed, right? They can be. I just don't know that it's there for him.
Randy Zellin is a New York-based former prosecutor turned pit bull criminal defense attorney with a sweetheart and more than 30 years of experience. He's tried cases against the DOJ and the SEC. He's a professor at Cornell Law, and he appears on every single show, but he told me his favorite now was Surviving the Survivor. From Yori, I will call her Yori, not Jory. Question for Randy, if there's time. As a foreigner, what kind of defense would Joran be able to have, assigned public defender or any defense attorney able to practice in Alabama who wants to rep him? I guess she's asking once he comes here what his deal be. And my final question for you, will he be extradited and will he stay here for a long time? Oh, you're muted. You're muted. You got to unmute yourself. I think you're muted.
The latter question first, which is, at this point, I don't know if he's getting here. I think if he gets here, he stays. Getting here, I don't know. There's a question mark on that. To your viewer's question, if he has private counsel, then private counsel, if not admitted to practice law in the district court in Alabama, can make a motion, make an application to the judge in Alabama for permission to appear for this one case. It's a fancy term called pro hoc vice. The lawyer would align him or herself with a local lawyer in Alabama who would act as a sponsor and make a motion for that lawyer to be able to practice in that Alabama court. If Mr. Van der Sloot cannot afford private counsel, then at that point, the government, the United States government, would actually pay his lawyer. The court would appoint a lawyer, and there's a panel of lawyers that sit in every district in the country who are qualified to handle federal cases, federal criminal cases. The judge would appoint a lawyer, and the taxpayers, us, would foot the bill for Mr. Van der Sloot's defense.
You heard it here, guys. So that's how it works. And hopefully Joran van der Sloot, despite getting the crap beat out of him, gets back here to America in one piece and finally faces justice in the United States courtroom. We will keep you all updated on the situation as we move forward. Want to thank again Mac, Dr. John Delatorre, Randy Zellin, awesome guests. We will be back tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Eastern time, with the prison guard who was watching Lyle and Eric Menendez and has some stuff to share with us. Until then, love you, America. Love you, New York. Love you, San Antonio. Love you, Birmingham, Alabama, Atlanta, Georgia, and everywhere in between.